I was heading home from work after a long day. Nothing out of the ordinary. I was admiring the sunset beyond the horizon, still wrapped up in the day's events. As I passed through a small park, a mere visual relief and a bit of natural comfort in the concrete jungle of routines and lives consumed by nearly automated tasks due to the endless repetition of days. Then, in the soft silence that the end of the day brought, I noticed an elderly woman sitting alone on a bench. Her face was hidden by her hands, but the faint sound of sobs broke the tranquility of the moment. Something inside me stopped. That scene, subtle and ordinary as it might have seemed, stirred something within. She wasn't just a woman. She was a heavy heart, a burden that, in that moment, seemed impossible to carry alone. I hesitated for a moment. I didn't know her or what she was going through, but the simple fact that someone was there, desolate, caught my attention. I walked toward her, feeling that at that moment, more than any hurry or commitment, what mattered was being present. I sat down beside her without saying a word. Sometimes, silent presence speaks louder than any rehearsed phrase. She, still immersed in her pain, noticed my presence but didn't react immediately. I stayed there, observing the slow sway of the trees in the wind, and after a timid moment, I risked saying, "I know I don't know you, but I'm here if you need anything." The woman, still guarded and restrained, whispered that she was fine and that it was nothing. The typical response of someone carrying the weight of the world, but trying to hide it behind a mask of normalcy. I glanced at her from the side, sensing the depth of that nothing that in truth seemed like everything. So, I decided to lighten the moment a bit, trying to get a smile, even if a small one. Funny, I began with a light and casual tone. When nothing happens to me, I also sit on park benches to cry a little. But only sometimes, you know? As a pastime, almost as a sport, I paused to observe her reaction. It's good to know I'm not alone in this sport. Nice to meet a teammate. She looked at me, surprised by the joke, and for a brief moment, the sound of her sobs stopped. Her eyes, still wet, looked at me as if trying to understand where this lightness was coming from. Then I saw a small smile escape her lips, as if hesitant to accept that even in pain, there can be space for something lighter. She sighed, long and deep, as if releasing a piece of the pain she carried. Still sitting sideways, without forcing eye contact, I continued, letting my words flow as gently as the wind moved the leaves around us. "You know, life isn't easy," I began, my voice calm and thoughtful. "It's a teacher. Good or bad, we never know in advance. But one thing is certain. The lesson will always be taught, one way or another." I looked ahead, as if reflecting on my own pains and learnings. The question is, how do you face it? How do you feed your inner monster, or your faith, to face what lies ahead? I noticed that she was listening closely, despite her distant gaze. I continued, adjusting my tone so that my words didn't sound like cliches but like heartfelt truths. It's not about being overly optimistic, trying to find something good in every disaster, as if it's someone else's problem. It's not about minimizing what hurts. It's about understanding the situation you're in, understanding what brought you here. Because often, the consequences we face come from avoidable situations, but they don't always depend solely on us. I saw her sigh again, as if the words resonated within her. I kept my tone, softer but firm. When we place all our expectations on others, whoever they may be, sooner or later frustration or disappointment will come. Not because people want to hurt us, but because no one can carry the weight of our hope beyond ourselves. With a handkerchief, the woman wiped her nose, and for a brief moment, she glanced in my direction, still keeping her head down. Her voice, almost a whisper, held a deep sadness. "That's true. I've always been so dependent. I always placed my hopes for life and happiness in others." As she spoke, I noticed how little by little The weight of those words was pulling her back into pain. Her body seemed to shrink, and I felt her presence retreating, closing in on herself again. Then, in an almost desperate outburst, she said, "That's why I'm useless. A nobody." Her hands returned to cover her mouth and nose, and the sobs resumed, as if each word had hurt her heart even more. I knew that moment required not only words but understanding. I took a deep breath, keeping my voice firm yet warm. "You're not useless, and you're definitely not a nobody. Don't say such things about yourself." I spoke with all the care of someone who knows harsh words leave marks. "I assure you that you have many lovable qualities that captivate people. We all have flaws and virtues, and the point isn't never failing, but how we acknowledge our flaws and work to improve what we have. That's good." She listened to me, still withdrawn, but I felt that my words were slowly breaking through the barrier that pain had built around her. Then, adopting a lighter tone, with a touch of humor to ease the mood, I added, "Look, let me show you a quality you have. Patience. Look at all the nonsense I've already said here, and you haven't even stood up and left." I let out a gentle laugh, looking at her fondly. "Besides being patient, you're polite and tolerant, which are rare qualities. See? Not everyone would put up with a stranger talking like this without running away." The gentle joke, combined with an affectionate tone, made her look at me again. This time, the weight of the sobs seemed to lessen, and a small smile began to appear on her face, like a light breeze after a storm. Once more, I noticed that she sighed deeply, as if slowly releasing the invisible chains that had held her in anguish. The sound of air leaving her lungs echoed like relief, a sign that she was finally about to release something that may have been suffocating her for a long time. When she looked at me again, I noticed a change in her eyes. The ice had been broken. We were no longer complete strangers sitting on a park bench. She now saw me as someone she could trust, someone who, however unlikely, was willing to listen without judgment and share the burden she had been carrying alone until now. Then she began to speak, and what came out of her mouth carried the weight of years of suffering. Her voice was low, almost a whisper at first, as if still testing the courage to release it all, and what she said was truly dramatic. "I was married for 25 years. Joe and I met in high school. It was young love, full of life." When she said this, I noticed her eyes losing the heavy sadness, and for a moment, she seemed to go back in time. We were no longer in that cold, lonely park. She was immersed in sweet memories, and her voice held a nostalgic joy, as if reliving every detail. Her hand, trembling with emotion, rested on her lap, holding her handkerchief more lightly. "We did everything together. We always went to youth dances. I was very beautiful back then." She laughed softly, almost apologetically, and quite vain too. "All the boys at school liked me." I noticed her voice softened, full of modest pride. "But it was Joe who won me over. He was handsome. He had a natural charm, you know? And that smile, my God, could melt anyone." She smiled at the memory, her eyes shining with an energy that contrasted with the tiredness her body showed. She paused, delving deep into memory. It seemed like she could see every detail of that special moment she was about to tell me. The first time he asked me to dance, it was at one of those dances with dim lights and soft music playing. I remember the feeling as if it were yesterday. Joe held my hand, and with that irresistible smile, he pulled me to the center of the floor. At that moment, it felt like we were the only ones there. He looked into my eyes, and everything around us disappeared. At that moment, I realized she was speaking not only with words but with her body. She was reliving it. The way her hands intertwined on her lap, how her chest rose and fell slowly in rhythm with a deeper breath. Everything indicated that these memories were her refuge. Her voice grew even softer, almost a whisper, as she continued. He held me by the waist, firm, but with such delicacy. And when our eyes met, he said, "You are the most beautiful girl at this dance. For me, there's no one else but you." I felt a shiver down my spine. My heart raced, and at that moment, the whole world disappeared. It was just him and me. She closed her eyes, as if she could feel Joe's warmth surrounding her again, the gentle touch of his hands. My face turned all red. I couldn't say anything. I was so nervous, and at the same time, so happy. He leaned in, and then, without saying anything else, he kissed me. She paused, and I noticed her eyes shining with tears. But this time, they were different tears. Tears of a time she wished she had never lost. "It was our first kiss," she continued, her voice now choked. "And it was there that I knew he was my prince." I believed in happy endings, like the stories they tell us when we're young. As she spoke, I noticed something. When she mentioned herself, everything was in the past. I was beautiful. I was vain. But when she talked about Joe, he was still alive in her words. "He is handsome. He has an irresistible smile," as if time hadn't touched him the same way it had touched her. And at that point, I didn't need to be a great observer to understand that her love for Joe remained intact, as strong and vibrant as it had been in their youth. I wanted to speak, wanted to ask more about that love, about how time had transformed that life of dreams into something different. But I stayed quiet, listening. I knew she still had more to say, that these memories, sweet as they were, carried a pain that hadn't been mentioned. Yet, she, still moved by the past, which now seemed to offer some comfort to her tearful present, continued. "When we finished high school, I went to study pedagogy to become a teacher," she said with a shy smile, as if reuniting with an old friend. Then she continued, "It was my childhood dream, and soon I got an internship at a small elementary school that served underprivileged children in another neighborhood." Noticing how she spoke of the children, with maternal affection, like a true mother hen embracing everyone, it didn't make sense to me, considering her initial declaration of feeling useless and worthless. It seemed impossible to associate this dedicated woman, who played such an important role in the lives of so many children, with the distorted view she had of herself. Then, I realized that, in addition to being someone concerned with child education, she took on an invaluable social role, acting with compassion and empathy for others, something she herself didn't seem to see. I felt this was the perfect moment to touch on the subject. I turned slightly toward her, keeping my voice warm and encouraging. "And I bet those kids like you very much. I bet many adults today feel immense gratitude for everything you did for them." She seemed immediately taken by excitement, as if my words had poked a cherished memory, and with a slight startle, raised her hands in the air and exclaimed with enthusiasm, "Yes. A few months ago, I met July, one of our students. She was such a thin, sickly girl, but with our intervention and school and family support, she transformed into a different child, healthy, happy. Wherever she goes, she spreads joy and good humor." At that moment, I noticed how her eyes shone, no longer with tears, but with pride. And as she continued, there was a new vitality in her voice, as if the weight of her pain had been briefly lifted. She recognized me on the street and got emotional. She introduced me to her son, Jamie, a beautiful, adorable boy. She told him that I wasn't just her teacher. I was like a beloved aunt, someone who was an important part of her life and the person she became. She paused, as if reliving that moment in her mind. Then, with a wide smile full of tenderness, she added, "We exchanged phone numbers, and today, we are great friends. She calls me Anne-Marie and little Jamie. He calls me Grandma, a sweetheart." The pride in her voice was palpable, and her eyes sparkled with genuine happiness. It was evident that this memory had touched something deep inside her. I couldn't resist taking this opportunity to delve deeper into the conversation, as she herself had introduced the importance of her work. With a caring look and a calm voice, I commented, "You see, just from this story alone, it's clear how important you are. Not everyone gets the chance to touch others' lives in this way. To be remembered with such fondness surely proves that not only did you make, but you continue to make, a huge difference in these children's lives, and now, in the lives of their children, too." She was silent for a moment, her eyes downcast, as if processing everything I had just said. Then, she looked up, more serene, though there was still a shadow of doubt. "But why then do I still feel this way?" Incomplete. As if, despite all of this, something is missing. It was as if that wound was still there, open, despite the happy memories. Perhaps it was the expectations she had always placed on others, as she had admitted herself. Sometimes, I began, carefully choosing my words. Even when we do so much for others, we still feel an emptiness because we forget to care for ourselves. It could be that, for so long, you devoted yourself to Joe, to the children, to others, that you forgot to look within and ask what you need. "What makes you happy?" She looked at me, her eyes misty, but this time, not with pain, but with reflection. I could see that my words had touched a sensitive point, something she might never have allowed herself to think about so clearly. "I never thought of it that way," she murmured, with an expression of surprise mixed with sadness. "I always thought that by caring for others, it would be enough, that I would find my happiness through them. And that's beautiful, it really is," I agreed gently. "But you also deserve your own space for happiness. You deserve to find something that is just yours. Not for others, but for you. It doesn't take away from what you did for them. On the contrary, it will make you even stronger." She then let out a long sigh, as if she were finally beginning to understand something that had been buried deep within for a long time. There was still much to be said, much pain to be released, but I could feel we were making progress, even if slowly. She recalled where she had left off in her story and, with a tone of sadness intertwined with nostalgia, heavy with pride and disappointments, resumed her account. Her voice was a bridge between the longing for the past and the scars the present bore. "When I began studying pedagogy and doing my internship at the school, Joe went off to serve in the Army. He was there for 2 years until he became a lieutenant. Oh, how unbearable the longing was when he was away, and when he came home on leave, it was as if I were in paradise. He treated me like a princess, you know, a delicate rose, a precious, unique gem." As she spoke of Joe, I noticed her eyes sparkled with a profound tenderness, but there was also a subtle shadow, as if each joyful memory were intertwined with a future disappointment. When he left the Army, he started working at a car dealership. Joe always had an irresistible charm. It didn't take long for him to become the sales leader. He earned very well. He won prizes for meeting sales targets: a refrigerator, a TV, a stereo, sofa sets, even a complete dining set. It was as if success had become a part of our lives. She paused for a moment, took a deep breath, as if trying to reconnect with the lightness of those days. Her eyes drifted off, reliving one of her most precious moments. It was on one of those days off that he invited me for a countryside outing. I went along excited, but without any big expectations about what he had planned. We were having a picnic under a huge oak tree, surrounded by green grass. The wildflowers had colors that seemed hand-painted. Oh, the butterflies, they were multicolored, and the bird song, along with the sound of a stream in the background, felt like the soundtrack to a slice of paradise. Her voice softened. The moment seemed so vivid that even I, sitting there with her, could almost feel the breeze and hear the gentle murmur of the clear water. It was a Sunday, October 18th, she repeated firmly, as if she wanted to forever etch the date into the air. I remember everything, every detail, She sighed before continuing, now with a gentle smile on her lips. Joe sat across from me, on the picnic blanket, and moved the food basket aside. He looked directly into my eyes, with that enchanting gaze that made my heart melt. She paused, and I saw her immerse herself again in that moment. He ran his hand through my hair, pushing it back from my face with such tenderness, placed a white daisy behind my ear, and held my chin. It was then that he took a small, fabric-covered blue box from his pocket. He gave me a gentle kiss, and looking at me, opened the box. She closed her eyes for a moment, as if wanting to feel once again the butterflies in her stomach from that moment. Inside the box were 2 rings. They were so beautiful, so perfect, they looked as though crafted by angels. He was a little shaky, nervous, almost as if unsure of the responsibility of what was to come. He took a deep breath, kept his posture steady, and said, her voice softened further, and she repeated the words engraved in her memory. Marie, I love you. You are the light of my days, and I've dreamed about this for so long. I feel uncertain, but I can't hold back what I feel, nor what I want for us to future. A family. Will you marry me? She looked at me, her eyes glistening with a mixture of joy and sadness. That scene, it was the most beautiful moment of my life. I felt so loved, so special, and at the same time, it feels as if time ran away and took that purity with it. I could see that, though there was a sweet longing for that day, there was also a heartache, an unresolved pain she had carried since then. Her eyes revealed it. There was beauty in her memories, but there was also the weight of everything that came afterward. I said yes, of course, with all my heart. We hugged so tightly that I could almost feel our hearts beating together. In that moment, I was certain that life could never be better than that. I was happy, complete. Joe was my world. She stopped, and I noticed tears forming in her eyes, though she tried to stay strong. The scene she described was so full of love, so emotionally charged, that I felt a lump in my throat as well. She took a deep breath, as if grounding herself back in the present, and looked at me. But time is a cruel way of changing things, doesn't it? Her voice trembled slightly now. I wouldn't trade that moment for anything, but sometimes I wonder if, somehow, I could have prevented what came after. If I had been different, if I had done more, would he have stayed? She fell silent, the weight of that question hanging in the air between us. I knew it was my turn to speak, to offer her a new perspective. Marie, you experienced something so deep, something that many will never have the chance to feel. And I know that the past can teach us much, but it can also become a prison if we let unanswered questions haunt us. The love you shared with Joe, no one can take that away from you. But the most important thing now is to remember that, beyond being loved, you deserve to love yourself. That moment you lived was beautiful, but you are so much more than any moment that has passed. She looked at me with eyes full of emotion, and I could tell that those words were beginning to penetrate her heart, perhaps the first spark of a new beginning. Marie took a deep breath, as if trying to control the wave of emotions that overwhelmed her. Her eyes, once soft and nostalgic, were now filled with sorrow, anger, and a pain that seemed suffocating. We had 2 wonderful children, she said with a brief sense of pride, as if, for a moment, she wanted to hold on to something positive. They are adults now, living their lives in an honest and responsible way, but that pride was soon swallowed by the weight of what was to come. But over the years, Joe changed, slowly. That caring, passionate, gentle man who treated me like a princess transformed. He became grumpy, rude, impatient with everything. He treated me like I was nobody. At first, I tried everything to reignite what we had. She paused, the memories of her efforts seeming more painful than any aggression Joe might have inflicted on her. I would get dressed up, do my hair, paint my nails, put on makeup. I'd make his favorite meals. And you know what happened? Nothing. He didn't even notice. It was like I was invisible. I became a ghost in my own house. No matter what I did, it was never enough. I only existed to be criticized, to wash his clothes, cook for him, and still endure his rudeness. 25 years, thrown away. The pain in her words was palpable, and I felt a tightness in my chest hearing how she had suffered silently for so long. I found everything out when I went to clean the attic of our house. She continued, now with a growing tone of desperation. It was dusty, and when I used the vacuum, the hose got caught in one of the gaps in the floorboards. Inside, there was a wooden box. I was curious, of course. Wanted to know what it was. She stopped, emotion choking her words for a moment. Tears were falling faster now, and she used a handkerchief to wipe her face and nose. Still, she pressed on, as if her story needed to be told, as if the words had to finally come out, even though they hurt. My world crumbled when I opened that box. Her voice broke. It was full of letters. Letters from women. Several women. He had been giving them what was mine. Joe had been seeing lovers for 15 years. 15 years. The pain mixed with humiliation in every word. I felt like trash. The ugliest and worst woman in the world. He would leave me alone at home with excuses of work meetings, inventing trips to be with others. And I, here, thinking he was tired, that work was weighing on him. I contributed more to the budget because he said he was earning less. I made sacrifices. For what? So he could spend it on his lovers. How could I have been so stupid? Her voice was now filled with anger, not only at Joe, but also at herself, for believing, for dedicating so much to something that turned out to be a lie. I found out that, for the last 4 years, he had been with a regular lover, a younger woman. The anger in her eyes was fierce. That bitch. In that instant, Marie transformed. The pride, the sweetness, everything that had marked her memories and stories until then was replaced by raw, intense fury. Her eyes were filled with rage I hadn't seen before. Her hands trembled, and her voice, which had been marked by sadness, was now filled with deep, bitter anger. He left me. He threw me away like I was nothing. And her, that woman, how could she steal everything we built together? The words came out in bursts, as if she were vomiting years of accumulated pain and anger. I gave everything, and he betrayed me. With that girl who will never know what it's really like to build a life. He chose her and threw me away like an old broken doll. I remained silent, allowing her to vent, allowing that fury to fill the space she had held inside for so many years. I knew she needed to release it, to feel it. Just being there, as a witness to her pain, was already an act of listening. I slowly turned to Marie, trying to remain calm in the midst of her emotional storm. She seemed about to explode, the pain and rage overflowing. I spoke with a soft, yet firm voice, full of understanding. I'm glad this happened, Marie. She looked at me, her eyes wide, and before I could say anything more, she interrupted me, her voice full of indignation. Are you crazy? You sit here and listen to my whole story, and now you're telling me something like that? My husband left home 2 hours ago to live with his lover, and I couldn't stand being in that damn place anymore. And now, you, a stranger, sit next to me on a forgotten bench in a park to mock me? What do you want, huh? Her voice was sharp. Her frustration felt like a contained scream, and her body pulled away from me, as if I were the last person she wanted to be with. I didn't move. I didn't change my posture. I just watched her silently, trying to absorb the pain pouring from her. I wasn't in a hurry. I knew she needed time to process everything, and that what she was feeling wasn't just anger, but fear, humiliation, and the loss of herself. I took a deep breath, gathering my words carefully so as not to intensify her suffering. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm, unhurried, without judgment. "Marie," I said, "I'm glad this happened because, in a way, you've freed yourself from this prison. Your marriage didn't end 2 hours ago when Joe went to live with a lover, nor the day you found those letters in the attic. It began to die long before that. It began over a decade and a half ago, slowly, like a patient bleeding without help, and you, unknowingly, became the one keeping him alive against your own will." She looked at me, her eyes now more confused, still marked by anger, but also by doubt. I continued, feeling the need to explain something that she might not yet be able to understand. "Every time you allowed yourself to be offended, devalued, ignored, every time you put yourself second, erasing your own desires, needs, dreams, every time you chose the well-being of others, especially Joe's, without thinking of yourself, you allowed Joe to be placed on a heavy pedestal, a pedestal that over time began to crush your self-esteem, killing your vitality, your essence. Your life was being buried, Marie." She took a step back, her head lowered, as if it were too much for her to process all at once. The silence between us lingered for a moment, heavy and dense. She seemed like she wanted to argue, maybe retort, but the words were lost in her throat. I saw her inner struggle, and I knew this was a battle she would need to fight with herself. I took a step forward, but without invading her space. "You allowed yourself to enter a prison of conformity, Marie. Maybe it was due to the pressure of societal expectations, of the kids, the need to keep up appearances, but you were the one who took the poison every day. Not Joe. He was there, living his irresponsible life, deceiving you, living in the pleasure of a false paradise with his mistress. But the one who was actually drowning in pain and silence was you. The wind passing through the leaves of the trees seemed now denser, heavier. I could feel the tension in Marie, the way she was starting to absorb the harshness of what I was saying, and at the same time, how it was destroying her inside. I finished in a softer tone, as if trying to calm the storm inside her. "I know the relationship with the kids is important, and I'm sure they've seen how Joe treated you. But now I wonder, and you? Who cared for you? For your heart? Who cared about not hurting your feelings? Who was the support you needed, Marie? Because if you don't put yourself first, no one else will." She slowly shook her head, as if she were still trying to understand, trying to convince herself that what I was saying was, in some way, a difficult truth to face. She murmured in a low, almost inaudible voice, "Yes, it's true." I stayed silent, allowing those words to resonate inside her. What more could I say now? What else could be said, except to give her the space to feel, to begin to understand what had never been said, never been acknowledged? She needed time, and what I could do now was simply be there, without rushing, waiting for the moment when she would be ready to take the next step. Holding back tears, Marie took a deep breath, as if that sigh was the first after a storm. It was as if tons of invisible weight had been released from inside her. Her gaze, once lost and dark, now turned forward, to nothing, but with a different gleam, a touch of admiration and clarity. Her voice, once trembling, sounded firm, still full of emotion. When I ran out of the house, right after Joe left, I was desperate. I felt betrayed by God, you know? I cursed him in so many ways. I said I would never pray again, never read the Bible, or step foot in a church. I didn't understand why I was going through this. Joe, that man I thought was still the romantic young man from the past, simply left me when my legs could no longer hold me and my exhausted body had no strength to continue. I saw this square, sat here, and then God played a trick on me. He sent you, an unlikely friend, a young man who might be the age of my kids, but who taught me such a big lesson with words that, despite the pain, made sense. Each one of them, you brought me a new perspective, freedom, a new beginning. Thank you for being here with me. Thank you for seeing me, for noticing me, for caring about me, without even knowing me. Her words echoed in the silence of the square, broken only by the soft rustling of the leaves in the trees around and the shy song of the birds at the end of the day. I stayed for a moment, not knowing what to say, but then, with a sincere smile, I replied, "Marie, I'm the one who thanks you. The trust in sharing such a beautiful life story, full of twists and turns, is something precious. And even more so, thank you for your kind words." Before we could continue the conversation, my phone rang. The vibration in my pocket shattered the enchantment of the moment. I looked at the screen and saw my mom's name. Back then, phones didn't have messaging apps. It was just voice calls. I answered, and on the other end of the line, my mom's worried voice. "Joshua, where are you? It's late. Why haven't you come home yet?" I tried to calm her down, explaining that I was with a good friend and would be home soon, that she didn't need to worry. But, like every good mom, she kept going, now with a mix of curiosity and that tone only mothers know how to use when they suspect something is wrong. "A friend? Who is this woman, Joshua Watson? Does Camila know about this meeting? Where are you?" I smiled, knowing that my mom was more curious than suspicious. Marie, who was sitting next to me, noticed the awkwardness in the air and, with a concerned look, gestured for me to hand the phone over to her. "Let me handle it. I'll explain," she whispered, hesitant but determined. I passed the phone to Marie, and she, a little nervous, began introducing herself. "Hello, Mrs. Watson. This is Marie Walker. But before she could finish, I heard my mom interrupting on the other end of the line. "Marie? Marie Walker, who went to President Kennedy School?" Marie's eyes widened in surprise, and she let out a loud yes. "You know me?" My mom's response came quickly, a mix of shock and joy. "Of course I know you. It's me, Emma Watson. My goodness, what a small world. How did you and my Joshua, how did you two meet?" My mom laughed heartily, her voice echoing through the speakerphone. I stood there, my head spinning, thinking about the trick that fate had just played. Running into an old friend of my mom's after so many years, in such an unexpected situation. It could only be the work of God, or the curious hands of destiny, or maybe both. The two of them chatted excitedly for over 40 minutes as we walked towards the subway station. I watched the enthusiasm on Marie's face, her expression now glowing, completely different from the woman I had met in that same park just a few hours before. They exchanged phone numbers and promised never to lose contact again, lamenting how they had drifted apart. Back then, there were no social media networks, so even if one had been searching for the other, it was nearly impossible to find each other. A few days later, it was a Saturday afternoon, Camila came over to my house, radiant as always. She hugged me tightly, and we kissed passionately. With the same joy, she greeted my dad, who was sitting on the couch watching TV. "And your mom? Is she ready for us to go?" she asked as she fixed her hair. I looked at the clock, also curious about my mom's delay. Then, from the top of the stairs, we heard the sound of heels slowly coming down. There she was, all made up, wearing the nicest dress she had in her closet. Camila, my dad, and I exchanged glances and started laughing. "Mom, are you going on a date?" I teased, unable to hold back my laughter. "Look out, Dad's going to get mad." My mom, keeping her composure, but with a smile on her lips, responded, "Don't be silly, boy. The last time I saw Marie, I was at least 20 years younger. I need to hide some wrinkles and crow's feet. I don't want her to think I've turned into an old hag." And with that, we all burst into laughter. My dad, never missing the chance for a joke, quickly added, "You look beautiful, my love. I'm thinking of not letting you go, just to keep all this beauty to myself." We laughed again, and Camila, with a playful look, turned to me and said, "Look, Joshua, learn from your dad, okay?" And so, between laughter, we got ready to leave. Before we left, my dad, always with a final joke, wished, "Good luck. I never liked ladies' tea." Once again, we laughed as we left the house. When we arrived at Mrs. Marie Walker's house, she was waiting for us on the porch with a big, welcoming smile. The lightness and peace on her face made me realize how much she had changed. The tea was delicious, and the conversation flowed so naturally it felt as if all the world's problems had disappeared. The woman who had once been lost in pain now radiated a touching serenity. And so, an unlikely encounter turned into an unexpected friendship. But that's another story for another day. We thank the central character of our journey for allowing us, through the use of a pseudonym, to share with us her life story, so full of emotion and significance. If you also identified with this story or any other, consider liking, subscribing, and sharing our video and channel. You are not alone. Until next time, hugs.